When you look at a crankbait vs a jerkbait, it's not automatically clear why you would choose one over the other. Both are hard plastic baits that have a side-to-side swimming action when retrieved. But there are big differences in how they work as well as the reasons you would choose one over the other. Let's get into that now after a quick differences in crankbait vs jerkbait shape. Generally speaking, you can often tell a crankbait apart from a jerkbait by the shape of the lure body even before you check the swimming actions. For crankbaits, the body tends to be deeper and more teardrop shaped and may even be rounder in cross-section. Jerkbaits tend to be more of a minnow-shaped lure with a slim body, and they often have somewhat flattened sides. That more elongated body shape has a big influence on the bait's action. In the above picture, the crankbait is on the left and the jerkbait is on the right. Not all crankbaits have big bills, but the largest lips will belong to deep-diving crankbaits. Generally speaking, jerkbaits tend to have slightly smaller lips and may rely on a combination of their density and lip design to achieve their running depth. In this article, we won't focus so much on another major option, lipless crankbaits, since they probably deserve their own article. For now, it's enough to say that these are sinking baits without lips. When reeled, they have a busy, tight wriggling action. In the same way, soft jerkbaits also probably deserve to be covered outside this article. These are typically sold as flukes and are shad or minnow-shaped soft plastic baits. Crankbait vs jerkbait swimming actions. Action, or the way a bait swims when retrieved or worked, is really where the major differences between these lures show up. With both kinds of lure, a big advantage is the ability to just tie one on and start casting it. There's no need for any additional tackle or rigging beyond rod, reel, and line. What sets them apart from each other is the continuous and busy wriggle that a crankbait is designed for compared to the zigzag and sideways turnout motion of a jerkbait during a snap pause retrieve style. Jerkbait swimming action. While a jerkbait will wobble and wriggle on a straight retrieve or when trolled continuously, the unique selling point to the fish is how it turns out and presents its full flank to a falling predator. This relies on popping slack into the line between each jerk of the bait. As well as turning out, jerkbaits tend to have a lot of body roll when pulled forwards through the water. If the cadence of your snap pause retrieve is regular, then the zigzag action will be easy to predict. On the other hand, mixing the cadence so it is a more random mixture of rip pause, rip pause, rip pause, rip pause will create a more erratic action. Both predictable and erratic movements can work on their day, and different predatory fish species may tend to prefer one retrieve style over another. For bass fishing, that more erratic mixture of rips and pauses tends to be more enticing. Trout in flowing water often like something more predictable. Crankbait swimming action. On a straight retrieve, crankbaits might swim with tight or slightly wider wiggles, described as a tight action or wide action. With wider action baits, you tend to get some body roll, but it's maybe not as big a feature compared to jerkbaits. Also, that full-on sideways turnout is not what crankbaits are known for. Instead, it's that consistent, busy straight swimming action that is the characteristic motion. The video below shows a deep diving model, and as well as bouncing off hard structure, you can see how the bait backs up and rises over obstacles when the retrieve is paused. As well as the deep divers, there are, of course, baits that run at all levels of the water column, so not all of them grub around on the bottom like the video above. However, it is a good illustration of the constant, busy swimming action. Instead of focusing on the pause and what you do with your rod tip, it's how the bait moves while you're reeling that creates its own particular attraction for crankbaits. With that said, it's important to know that stopping and starting your retrieve when using crankbaits is also a tool you need for consistent success. Burning a crankbait and pausing is a great way to trigger a reaction strike from bass, perch, pike, walleye, trout, and many more predators. All crankbaits should come with a description of what water depth they will dive to and swim at when retrieved. As explained in the next section, the range of bill types means that you can get crankbaits for deep water or for fishing super shallow just below the surface and every layer of the water column in between. Types of bills for lipped crankbaits. All told, the angle and the size of the bill is what controls how deep a lipped crank will dive. Funnily, the shallower the angle of the bill, the steeper diving angle. The bigger that bill, then the more water it can grab, and when set at a shallow angle, the deeper waters it can reach. Perhaps in super cold water, the fish could be lying hard on the bottom in water that is too deep to reach with a crankbait. Casting a crankbait vs jerkbait. For both types of bait, it is generally an advantage to cast them as far as you can within practical limits. The reason for this is that the first stage in using them is to crank them down to their natural running depth. If your cast is too short, then most of your retrieve will be taken up by that descent. The exceptions would be either when fishing super shallow or when using sinking jerkbait lures that you can count down to deeper water before starting to work the bait. What are crankbaits good for? The combination of long casting and active retrieve style, either just a straight retrieve or burning punctuated by short pauses, means that crankbaits let you search LOT of water. Classically, this is typically associated with fairly warm water temperatures when the fish are happy to actively chase down a bait. In baitfish colors, these baits can be bounced off hard bottom structure or burned over / parallel with cover. Equally, those colorways can be simply burned through the water like a naive young fish not realizing it is out for a stroll in a bad neighborhood. Crawfish colorways can be especially fantastic when bounced off that bottom structure in colder water temps before the baitfish shoals really get going. The big surprise to some people comes from their other main superpower, the ability to provoke a reaction strike from sleepy, reluctant fish. Because the retrieve style is so active, this can be a great way to stay warm while winter fishing. See the section below on winter fishing with crankbaits to take advantage of this surprising tactic. What are jerkbaits good for? The exaggerated turnout action of jerkbaits give them a unique power to trigger strikes in a variety of predatory fish species. Particularly in the suspending, neutral buoyancy versions, it's the ability of the bait to hang right in the face of the predator, showing a full profile of the bait that makes it so attractive. When baitfish face across the normal direction of travel or the direction of flow, it almost always means they are in trouble. That can be very tough for a predator to ignore. Between each pause, the swimming action is a very convincing impression of a dying or injured baitfish. This adds another trigger that is equally difficult to ignore. Taken together, those triggers make jerkbaits great for persuading pressured or unwilling fish to eat, while also being extremely effective for aggressive, active fish too. Changing the cadence of retrieve and size of bait lets you adapt to those different moods. Because you can match the density, sink rate, and lip design to a wide range of depths of water, this makes jerkbaits very adaptable across seasons, water temperatures, and depths. A suspending jerkbait can be cranked down to fishing depth and then twitched very frequently in the coldest water. It will hold that fishing depth during those super long pauses and then kick every now and then. Counting to 10 between each kick seems like a long time, but winter largemouth bass anglers who have enough patience might get up to 45 seconds or a minute between each pop of the bait when it is absolutely freezing. Alternatively, a floating jerkbait can be worked up to a piece of cover and then you can allow that bait to rise up and over the snag. Once clear, cranking the bait down again and continuing to work it puts you in with a great shot of contacting fish associated with that cover. For both crankbaits and jerkbaits, it's possible to trigger a reaction bite even when they are not actually in a feeding mode. These are two of the only styles of baits that can do this. The way they both do that are slightly different. For jerkbaits, it is a case of hard snap to dead stop. How to retrieve a crankbait. In its simplest form, crankbait fishing can just be throwing out as long a cast as is comfortable and just giving a straight, steady retrieve of the bait right back to you. This simplicity is one thing that can make them a great option for beginners. The motion of the bait when retrieved is just plain attractive and it works. Even when retrieving a shallow running crankbait, you can mix up a continuous burn style of retrieve with a burn and pause style. The fish will tell you which is the best option on the day. With that said, these are not just beginner's baits. There will be an ideal speed to make each bait work best, and it's up to you to find it. Also, cranking a bait down to its fishing depth may involve reeling more aggressively before settling into the fishing speed of your bait. Feeling the strength of the vibrations of the bait as it is working gives you a good idea of what is going on beneath the surface. As with all lures, you should also experiment with the action in clear water close to you, where you can see what the bait does in response to your movements and retrieve. That way you know how to reproduce that when your bait is out of sight too. For squarebills and deep diving baits with long bills, cranking down until you smack hard cover and then pausing before repeating the action is another important technique to master. Learning when to grind through soft cover and then burn and pause while bouncing off heavier cover is the key here. How to work a jerkbait. Working a jerkbait properly is the biggest key to success with these baits. Just as with crankbaits, the first step is to cast as far as possible and then crank, or count the bait down to the fishing depth. What comes next is the most important factor. You need to match the jerking action and the overall cadence of retrieve to how active the fish are. The more active the fish, the more aggressively you can rip your bait. At the same time, the smaller and lighter a bait is, the easier it is to overpower a jerkbait with a rep that is too aggressive. For those baits, more gentle, short snaps are the way to go. In other words, it's also important to match the right bait to the action you want to present to the fish. The best way to create an effective jerk action is by using a combination of rod and reel. Lifting the rod tip towards a horizontal position and then snapping it down towards the water surface is what creates that jerk stop motion. While you need to reel up some of the slack between each snap, don't reel all of the slack up. In an ideal world, the first part of the snap reps through the slack and then comes tight to the lure. In this way, the lure goes from a dead stop to maximum acceleration before hitting a dead stop again. Crankbait vs jerkbait for spring fishing. Spring crankbaiting. The speed cranking bite is fantastic through early spring and finishes when fish start to spawn. Up until the spawning period, crawl-based colors are a great crankbait option. During this time, the fish will be transitioning from the deeper water of the outside to cover winter holding areas. The further into spring and closer to the spawn you get, the shallower the fish will move and also the more relevant baitfish color crankbaits become. Spring jerkbaiting. Jerkbaits are possibly the best ever bait for triggering a response at a dormant fish, and because fish like baits show up in spring, it's possible that triggering one fish can turn the whole shoal into feeding mode. The more midwater positioning of most jerkbaits makes some kind of baitfish colorway generally a more appropriate choice than full-on crawfish colors. You can go with very big jerkbaits in spring to give a kind of super exaggerated signal and pull lone big fishing from a long range. Start out with super aggressive rips, then dial it back to more gentle twitches if they won't eat it. The final modification is to go to a very small jerkbait to try to turn any/all fish on within a school. Crankbait vs jerkbait roundout. Both of these styles of baits are great for actively covering water and for catching actively feeding fish. In terms of the speed of surge coverage, the crankbait probably comes out on top due to the overall faster retrieve style. Along with the Alabama rig, these methods are also capable of drawing a feeding response out of a fish that would be considered switched off and in a non-feeding mode. Speed cranking in winter will keep you warm in that cold weather and is great at switching on individual fish. You usually need to be able to bounce your lure off hard cover to make this work to its full potential. However, the champion lure for triggering unresponsive fish is still probably the suspending jerkbait. The reason for this is the ability to be worked extremely gradually through an area while exhibiting radical cuts to the left and right from time to time. After a while, this can trigger an entire shoal of baits into feeding. Among all those fish, there may be some huge specimens that get caught up in the feeding frenzy. The question for which to choose in those cold water situations probably comes down to water clarity and the need to get to the depth of the fish. In clear water, fish will gradually move up to a suspending jerkbait, whereas in murkier water, really deep diving crankbait that can bash off cover while making a big commotion will probably win the day.